We are artists and explorers. We are liberators and survivors. We are fighting for peace and finding the cure. We're remembering the past and looking to the future. We are caring for each other, and we are proud. We are Western Washington. These are our stories, and this is your program.
Celinda Sheridan, Bill Colby, and Fumiko Kimura, three prominent members of the Puget Sound Sumi Artist group, pursuing their passion, Sumi-e, Japanese ink painting.
The Sumi painting started in 7th century AD in China. After 13th century, the idea of the Sumi painting went to Japan through Korea. We learn about, as you paint, the Zen approach to painting, and that is painting from the heart or the soul so that it flows from within rather than visually seen through the eyes. It comes through the whole body. When I paint, I don't even have music. I'm totally into it. So it's a time of peace for me, for myself. Sort of time to do what I really like to do. I think I'm more passionate about that than any other type of artwork, which I do, but it gives you more time for peace rather than watercolor, for making choices of watercolor and this and that, all the items that goes with that type of approach to painting. But the Sumi has this softness that's coming from inside, and it's the brush that does it, but I get challenged from different brush strokes that will work for me or will not work for me. I practice a lot. I think it has this, while you're painting or practicing, it has this calming effect. I'm concentrating, but at the end, I think one feels some peace. I always wanted to paint from, as I was remember, 3rd grade. And that's kind of young, but before that, I wasn't aware of it. But until the teacher told me, stay after school and do it. And then, because I enjoyed it, maybe I feel like maybe I was born with it. Could it be?
The first book I ever bought for myself in high school was a classic book in Sumi-e painting. Although when I was in high school, I didn't think about doing it myself. I just liked the way the paintings looked.
It wasn't until after she got a doctorate in Chinese literature that Celinda became a Sumi-e artist.
I consider Sumi-e to be an elegant, not only elegant, but a subtle art form. And one thing I discovered when I began studying Sumi-e as contrasted with Chinese ink painting is that it seems like the whole tradition of ink painting, by the time it got to Japan, underwent this process of becoming more subtle and more elegant in the Japanese context. So although the tradition itself came from China, obviously, the Japanese artist definitely refined it. I took a class with a Chinese painter, and while I was taking the class, I realized that doing painting, doing expressive art was truer to my nature than scholarly work. Shortly after I took the class, I was living in West Texas. There were no Sumi painters there, and so I spent a number of years working by myself in Texas, ordering supplies through the mail, buying books, and kind of doing painting. And so it was not until I moved back up into Tacoma in 1994 when I joined the Puget Sound Sumi Artists that I began learning some of the finer points of ink painting.
Fumiko helped found the Puget Sound Sumi Artists Group in 1986. Today, the group holds several art exhibitions and cultural events throughout the year.
I gathered 3 people, or myself for Sumi, and then second for the flower arrangement, and the third for the calligraphy. So I thought, well, it could expand from Sumi organization. Within that, we could have other cultural interest and learn more about it. So this is how we organized, and then have this organization started.
It's fun, isn't it? It's just like, I know it, yeah. Clean brush. Just remember that.
So if you put it close by, then you can see it better. So you wanna hold it like move your hand up a little bit, right around there.
Bill Colby's background is in printmaking. He was a professor at the University of Puget Sound for 33 years. He enjoys Sumi-e because it pushes him as an artist.
My interest has always been in the Asian arts, and I did teach a survey course in Asian arts at the college for a dozen years. A successful brushstroke for me is one that is free. That's a real challenge to do it, and it will have the look of being free.
The beauty of Sumi-e truly lies in its simplistic elegance.
I think that's it. That's it. It's very elegant when you just have a few strokes. In fact, the practice may be of doing an artwork or an image with 5 brush strokes. You know, kind of working that out towards its simplicity. It's a challenge, and you sometimes do a dozen, 15 before you're happy. I think a good or excellent or wonderful Sumi artwork, you know, comes from what I'll call an intense black, a black that is kind of intriguing and charming into shades of going into very light tones.
Sumi-e artists use open space in their paintings to help stimulate the imagination.
The value of an open space in a Sumi painting is really based on the fact that it has to have space to breathe. And sometimes when you get a close-up of something, whether that happens to be a photograph of an individual and so forth, that you kind of zero in on what's happening, the thing can't breathe. It doesn't have any space to breathe. And so I think that's an important factor in Sumi work, that they always, almost always, leave some generous space in different areas, but then you can then look at that particular area and see that that has room to live.
On one level, open space in Sumi-e is just, you think, well, of course, because you're making ink strokes on white paper. However, in the Asian context, it's hard to put in words, and maybe I shouldn't even try, but emptiness is in some ways more than empty, and so you'll find this dance between what's full and empty. And so you kind of have to turn your mind around to the fact that the empty space is actually full. And so what happens over time is you develop a sensitivity for the empty space that's not really doing anything. However, if you're not sensitive to the liveliness in it, your painting won't come alive. It's the combination of the empty and the full, the light and the dark, the wet and the dry, long strokes and short strokes, the sort of the opposites that work together in a painting. And that's what brings a painting alive. It's that combination of opposites, the yin and the yang, that work together in a harmonious way. Of course, practicing and getting an intuitive sense of what those opposites are, and then being able to paint in a somewhat confident, assured kind of way all at one time is really a feat. In fact, the painters often talk about, well, this painting or this calligraphy piece needs to be done all in one breath, which means you don't have time to calculate these things. You have to have internalized them so well that when you're painting, it's all done in one breath, and all of this comes forth. So it's always this kind of tension between practice and then letting go and breathing and letting the painting happen. And that, in the end, is the sense of spontaneity, the sense that this painting is as natural as something growing in nature. That's the gift.
If you put it this way, it's more action.
And it's longer.
Yeah, yeah. So I got the feeling of it, so I didn't finish that one either.
Fumiko teaches beginning to advanced Sumi-e classes.
Yeah, so you have the foundation as a gray, and now go for the dark
Okay.
wings and tail.
So I need to press down a little harder.
Oh.
It's not quite that hard.
Yeah, you have to do that part maybe after it dries, because it doesn't,
Yeah.
blend into it. So otherwise you could do it here. I'm known to teach unorthodox way, not 1, 2, 3 steps, except for the beginners. But as they go on, I want the students to not copy what's there. I would take flowers in the vase, but know that you see something there and then get the essence of it. And that essence is coming from the object or it's coming from your own soul. So, you have to kind of adjust that and paint unlike what you see, but it's what might be there or how you feel about it. And that's different things as it comes out on the paper. You could go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I started that.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. You did this? Very good, isn't it? I teach my classes. If it happens, you don't like it, it's somebody else's standard. But this is your way of having painted, so accept it. And then if you don't like certain areas, maybe you could do another one. Do 12 of them or more. This is fine too. Yeah. In teaching, I've learned how important the compassion is toward the students. So when you have that sense of compassion toward the students, I feel I'm maturing. But keep it separate. Maybe you want some miniatures, so put the clouds and then light.
Clothes come from.
Yeah, someplace a little bit lower.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Someone told me if you could have that sense of compassion, you need that in the artwork, and maybe it'll show in the artwork. That part I don't know, but that's why I'm pursuing. Maybe it's just from compassion leads into my painting that I need to do the painting as well. So I'm enjoying that part very much, and I've learned about myself how enjoyable it can be, and maybe that'll pass on to students who might feel, this is fun. I didn't know that kind of feeling.
So let's take about 10 deep breaths, and it helps to raise your arms because that just slows down the breathing. So let's just go.
Celinda also teaches Sumi-e classes.
If I'm going too fast or too slow, you just go on your own rhythm. It's amazing because almost from the very beginning of the time when I started practicing Sumi-e on my own in West Texas, before I knew it, I was teaching kids and how to do it. And I was thinking, well, I'm not sure if I'm the person to be doing this because it seems like I need, 50 more years of practice to be able to teach. But it's something I've continued to do, and the invitations to teach show up in unexpected places, and I enjoy it tremendously. And I found that teaching is a big help in terms of keeping on track with practice, because if I'm showing someone how to make brush strokes, I'm bound and determined to have practiced before I do that. You might try to do like an outline of the shape and leave the center white. Does that make sense? The other interesting thing about teaching is that in the environment of the course, a community develops. And this may be true of most art forms, but the energy of folks getting together to do Sumi-e is powerful. And most of my students say that that's in the context of the class is where they enjoy practicing Sumi-e, and maybe the only time they practice Sumi-e is with a group of people. And I like to sort of be a leader in that, but once a class is going, it's like people are doing Sumi-e irregardless of the teacher. It's a very interesting thing.
Because a lot of the Sumi artists work with representational objects, things, scenes, that sort of thing, I think that approach is kind of divided between the technique of the Sumi work and the representation of the scene that they're kind of creating. I definitely approach it as kind of an organizing the brushwork in a more abstract way on the paper. My scene may end up being representational, but in a semi-abstract way, perhaps. I guess I'll call it composition design-oriented. When I look at even an exhibit of whether it's Sumi or just any kind of an exhibit I'm going to, my eye sort of goes to the work and to see how it was organized. Because of my printmaking background, I include particularly either etchings or with wood blocks with the Sumi work. And sometimes, more recently, I've simply been printing wood blocks and then doing a kind of a Sumi background, simply because the wood blocks are oil-based and the Sumi work is water-based. And so it gives me a chance to have a real casual, loose approach with the Sumi work and a tighter with the wood block in terms of working with it. And sometimes I'll do that with just tonalities of different things of black and white, and sometimes I'll actually do it with a color Sumi work. Wowzer.
Bamboo is a central figure in Japanese culture. It's believed to ward off evil spirits and can be found surrounding many Shinto shrines. It represents strength, integrity, bravery, and flexibility.
bamboo is not just a symbol, but a subject of Sumi-e painting that most people who have seen kind of Asian ink painting are aware of. It occurs so frequently and has for centuries. Some of the reason for that is that the brush strokes that you need to practice calligraphy, so you're writing Chinese characters with a brush, those strokes appear in the bamboo. So I often think of like, say, Chinese scholars practicing their strokes, and then at some point or other, they start doodling or playing around and seeing what their strokes might turn into. So it turns out that the strokes used for bamboo, the kind of controlled, straight strokes that make up the stalks, and the delicately kind of curved leaf strokes are the strokes that are needed to produce beautiful calligraphy. So there's a tie-in that way. The other tie-in is that bamboo itself is a rich symbol in Asian culture that speaks to people just over the centuries. And it has to do with the nature of the plant. The stalk of the plant is firm but hollow. The leaves are delicate. And the idea that the plant can withstand any kind of adversity, it can bend with the wind, but it can grow to be 20 feet tall, is a symbol that relates to people who may be putting up with adversity in their lives, one way or the other.
Go with the flow kind of thing. That's my idea, that leaves sway. And I have one bamboo only. Everything's all gone because my husband took all the roots out because it's going into the lawn. But I said, let's save one. And we have this windy day, but it bends with the wind, comes right back up, and it's that strength. It will never break. And it's only this thin, this tall. And so it's that strength we get from looking at bamboo. And to me, that's what I feel, the strength of it.
Fumiko draws her strength from her art and the natural world around her.
When we do the artwork, I think the appreciation comes from where we respond to what's in nature. Maybe that's the beginning of drawing class. You have something to do with drawing and nature items. So in Sumi, we always start with the nature subject. And I like to go out there on a trip and get inspired, but from seeing something different I haven't seen, like Multnomah waterfall. Oh, much, that was so inspiring. So I do calligraphy, I do calligraphic painting, I do painting itself and non-objectively. It's all organic. I relate to anything organic anyway. So it sort of speaks to me in that way, that it's a source of natural growing item, just like we're natural growing humans, that there's a connection.
The most satisfying thing for me about this art form, it's the experience of taking the brush and using the ink and putting the brush to paper and having something absolutely new come out. And so I feel as if I'm in the tradition, but something new is happening. And when I have that experience, that is definitely the most satisfying part of the art form for me. One of the most inspiring things is to see how each individual makes Sumi-e their own, and how, although people may be painting similar subjects, each one is unique. And it's inspiring to see an old art form be adopted by folks and see individual self-expression come out. It's a very interesting thing, and leads me to suspect that we're going to see more and more Sumi art in more surprising places as time goes on.